Chapter 1. Beneath a slate-gray sky, a young woman approaching her 15th summer clung to a wall of rock 20 feet off the ground, hoping desperately not to fall. That morning had been cold and damp, threatening snow, and though she had tied her furs tight about herself before leaving home this morning, the cold wind was yet another reason she could not wait to have a crystal of her own. Only one more day. Secure in her footing, she reached her hand up and smiled as she pulled herself onto the narrow ledge in the red canyon wall. There, several feet away, sheltered from the wind and rain by the ledge, was a nest with 3 rather large eggs inside. She had noticed their mother, a large, beautiful eagle, had been fussing at this spot for the past several days, and Demara's curiosity had won out over her better sense. Now that she was here, she thought it a bit silly, but she'd never seen an eagle's nest, let alone one's eggs, before. She sat for a moment before climbing down. Mother Eagle wouldn't be gone long, and Demara did not want to be here when she returned. But something in the wind blowing through the rocks and the trees of the Crystal Hills called to her, urging her to come find it, whatever it was. "Demara!" Now that she actually heard. "Demara, where are you?" Carefully, Demara peeked over the ledge to see Jantara appear around a bend in the path, her green crystal glowing for warmth. She too wore furs, like everyone did when the turnings got cold. Quickly, Demara hid, hoping that Jantara had not been taking any lessons from her sister when it came to observation. It was common consensus among the children of the Blossom tribe that daily chores with the amiable shepherd were preferable to the stern and industrious huntress. But Demara tended to disagree. Jantara aside, watching goats eat grass was just so boring. "I swear," Jantara grumbled as she passed below, if that girl got herself lost, nobody better try blaming me. It's Liara's fault for not knocking sense into her." Demara tried not to take it personally. Though she would have never said those things in front of Demara or her mother, Jantara could and would complain about anyone with anyone else. Just as she was walking below her perch, Demara tossed a loose pebble against the far wall, where it fell and landed at the back of the older woman's head. Demara had to stifle a giggle as Jantara spun around looking for the source of the stone, never once looking up. A moment or two after the shepherd had passed out of sight, just as Demara was going to finally climb down from the ledge, she heard another voice call out, "Okay, you can come out now." Demara looked over the edge and smiled to see the slight figure looking upwards, a strand of vibrant red hair sprung loose from beneath her fur cap. "She's gone." The girl looked her way and Demara grinned. "Boo!" Demara said as she popped her head out over the ledge. The other girl sighed. "Really, Demara? You're hiding from work now?" Demara let her feet dangle over the edge, taking a sitting position as she spoke. "No, there's an eagle's nest up here. Come see, Rainey." Her friend's face lit up. "Really? How many?" "3," Demara called back down. Rainey was already climbing her way up the wall, and a few moments later, Demara helped pull her up onto the ledge. It was cozy up here, but plenty enough room for 2 14-year-old girls to sit. "Wow," Rainey said, her emerald eyes wide as she inspected the 3 eggs. "They're bigger than I thought they'd be." Demara laughed. "Well, yeah, they're not chickens." "What's that?" Looking over the nest again with Rainey, she noticed something glinting in between the sticks and leaves, and so leaned in to take a closer look. She reached out her hand to brush aside a downy feather and revealed a crystal, sky blue mixed with dark onyx, and gasped. "Don't touch it," Rainey hissed. Demara rolled her eyes and retracted her hand. "I just wanted to see." "Did you know they did that? Put crystals in their nests?" Rainey shook her head. "Wow," Demara said, thinking of the mother eagle who must have carried this crystal here and wove it into her nest. "We should go, before their mom comes back." By the time they reached the bottom, Jantara was coming back around the bend, muttering to herself about the cold. "Miss Jantara!" Demara called when she saw the older woman. "There you are!" Rainey shot Demara a glance, but couldn't contain her laugh. The shepherd stopped to glare at them. "I don't know where you've been, and I don't care, Demara," the exasperated woman said, teeth chattering. She stopped, hummed, and Jantara's green crystal began to glow brighter. And you, Rainey, what are you doing here? Who's watching the goats? Colton, Rainey said. Shantara swore. You left. Never mind. Let's go before one of the goats outwits him. The girls laughed and followed several paces behind Shantara, chatting to themselves. What were you going to do with that crystal? Rainey asked in a low, conspiratorial voice. Demara glared at her. I wasn't going to take it, Demara said defensively. Sure, but if you had. Demara tried to think about it, but only for a moment. Among the Blossom tribe, to have a crystal was to be an adult, a contributing member of the tribe. You used them to gather food, to till the earth, to lift logs or throw stones. But one thing even the hunters never did was leave the hills. 2 years ago, during the year of no rain, the elders had said that the hills that now surrounded them were their home of the god Ulari, and by remaining there they would be safe under her mother's protection. There had been water even then in that horrible year, and that had been enough to convince what remained of the Blossom tribe that they had to stay in case the world ever changed so suddenly once again. To go down from the hills, to venture out into the world below was death. Explore. They're not going to give you a crystal if you say things like that. You don't know that. Rainey gave her a sideways look that cut right through her. Her friend always could tell when Demara's head was too far in the clouds. The nest had not been far from where they were grazing the goats that day, and they were already coming to that ridge, and it was time to snap back to the here and the now. It's okay, Demara assured her. You asked what I would do with that crystal. I'm going to try to join the hunters tomorrow. Rainey sighed in relief, then gave Demara a too-sweet grin. Good. I was hoping you weren't going to do anything too drastic this time. I know how much you looked up to him. That evening, after the sun had set, Demara sat with her parents in the small hut they called their home. It was a simple thing, a small, round room, with 2 smaller ones attached to different points along the outside, one for Demara and one for her parents to sleep in. Like most evenings, they sat around a central fire, passing bowls and pots made of clay stacked high with whatever good thing Mother had prepared for them. Tonight was a bone stew and a pile of grain boiled half to mush. Mother crushed up one of their last salt rocks in her mortar and sat it down on the flat serving stone between her small family and the fire. It had hardly touched the surface before Demara and her father were racing for it to pour on top of their grain. Demon, Mother warned. You let her have some. Liara wasn't a severe woman, thin and with an easy smile, and Demara's same brown hair, only longer. It was hard to imagine how she could quell the large hunter that was Demara's father, as small as she was, but Demon obeyed his wife more loyally than any other man in the tribe obeyed his. So, Demara, honey, are you excited for the turning tomorrow? Have you decided what you're going to choose? Father, mid-bite, nodded in agreement. Demara swallowed, knowing they'd hate the honest answer. I want to join the hunters, she said. Father was ecstatic, spitting out some grain on the floor as he leaned over to squeeze her and cheer her on while Mother gave her a more discerning look. That's great news, Demon said. Another hunter in the family. What a great turning this is looking out to be. What is it, Liara? Mother shook her head and then smiled. It's nothing, she said as she poured herself a bowl full of the soup. It's a good choice, Demara. I guess I just expected you to say something else. There was something else, but Demara knew she couldn't say it, not in front of Demon. Oh, don't you start on that now, Demon said with an edge to his voice. Be glad the notion is finally out of her head. Demara paid very close attention to her soup, observing the small bubbles of grease shimmering on the top of her bowl, dancing around the roots and tubers and cabbage that filled the broth out. She would have watched grass grow, or watched the night sky for stars, or any other number of things to avoid giving her father any inkling that she'd been thinking about that very thing only this morning. Mother gave him a look, but said nothing else. I'm just excited to finally have a crystal of my own, Demara said, trying to break the silence. Father smiled, and Mother took her hand and squeezed it reassuringly before returning to their meal. That night, Demara laid in her bed in silence for hours, listening to the world, unable to sleep. Tomorrow was the turning, her 15th. It was the day she had waited for her whole life, when she would finally be given a crystal of her own. She would no longer be a child, and people would have to stop treating her like it. The only person left who had never made her feel like that was Rainey, ever since Uncle Derek. There wasn't a single person in the Blossom tribe that liked thinking back to those terrible days 3 years ago, when nearly a quarter of the tribe was lost in the year's second turning, and twice that to the demonic beasts and raiders that had chased them across the Fringe. A year like that had never happened again, but the elders had vowed to never lose another member of the tribe, and so the prohibition had stood. The Blossom tribe did not leave their hills, even though the world outside changed and went on without them. They had no need for explorers. But when sleep finally came to her that night, it was short and full of dreams of being chased down dark corridors and glowing red crystals and a figure made of brilliant white light reaching out for her, begging her to take its hand. She awoke that morning well after dawn, feeling as though she had hardly gotten any rest at all. Each year at the turning, the Blossom and many other tribes would gather to hold a festival, celebrating the closing of the year. There would be music and singing and dancing and games and food and all throughout the day, and by night, after the feast, they would begin the rite of the turning to mark the end of the current year and to welcome the start of the next. But that once joyous affair had turned somber for the Blossom tribe 2 years ago, unable to celebrate another year with so many of their loved ones lost. Demara sat with her friends near the stream that ran along the side of their tiny village as they took turns tossing rocks at tree stumps, imitating the practice the hunters would go through learning to throw with their crystals. Like practically every day since the last turning, it was cold and dreary, with the sun hidden behind an unbroken blanket of cloud that always seemed to threaten rain or snow. Elder Harris was already calling it the Year of Gray Skies. Even now, it was hard to tell it was almost sundown. "I hope it rains blood next turning," Colden was saying as he watched Rainey throw stones at the stump. He was a thin boy, about Demara's height, with his black hair cut short to keep out of his eyes. "Not every day. Just once." "You say some of the strangest things, Cole," Marco said as he shook his head, and knocking one of his long wavy locks of black hair loose, forcing him to tuck it back behind his ear. "Why would you ever want it to rain blood?" "I don't know," Colden said. "I've never heard of it happening before. Could be interesting." "You don't bleed nearly often enough," Demara muttered. Rainey grunted, throwing as hard as she could in a large motion. The rock flew true and struck the post with a satisfying thunk. She turned, tossing her last rock up and down in her hand, and gave Demara the most mischievous grin. "I could help him with that." "Help me with what?" Colden asked. A rock bounced harmlessly off his chest to settle in his lap. "You're up." Rainey practically skipped her way over to where they were sitting, then motioned for him to stand. When he did, she took his spot next to Marco. "What about you, Demara?" Marco asked. "Are you going to be a hunter too, right?" "Children," a voice cut in, and they all turned to see the gray-haired old lady, Elder Garrel, the crystal keeper, dressed in her traditional headdress and paints, with her deep rose crystal hanging at her neck, glowing for warmth. "It's time." She didn't need to say more than that, though Rainey did have to snap Colden on the shoulder to stop him from throwing, and to follow them through the village to the Crystal Keeper's lodge, where they joined most of the tribe. Demara's eyes lit up as they settled on the many-colored display of crystals laid out upon the blanket, glinting in the light from the fire. She reached for a brilliant blue and green swirled piece the size of her big toe, only to have her hand swatted away by the old woman who kept them. "Wait your turn, girl. Don't think I can't see you." She swatted a young boy with her walking stick. "All of you, pay attention. You will each have a chance to see later." As soon as she was sure she had all of the children's attention, a dappled light of rose and amber and green shone from the hunk of crystal the size of her skull that sat on the elder's small altar at the back of the lodge, bathing the inside and the dozen or so assembled children's faces. Elder Garrel grinned at the look of awe the children wore. The heart crystal was said to be the body and the home of their patron deity, Ulari. "Crystals are a gift," Elder Garrel said in her most theatrical voice, "to us from our God. They give us light. They keep us warm. They protect us. They guide us. A tribe lives and dies by its crystals, and by its crystal bearers. For all adults of this tribe, use and skill with their crystal is a mark of honor, and how we show our God thanks for her gifts." Ulari's light began to clear into a soft white daylight. Today, 4 of you begin your journey into adulthood. Marco chose first, settling on the blue and green one Demara had been drawn to, but decided against after closer inspection. Then, Rainey chose a fiery crystal with a mix of red and orange that made it look almost exactly like her hair. Colden chose a green crystal with white and yellow occlusions. All 3 of her friends had picked their crystals already, but none of the options felt quite right to Demara. And that feeling was important when it came to picking a good crystal, her uncle had told her once. She found herself standing in front of Ulari, staring at the light pooled inside. She was reminded of the dream she'd had the night before, and wanted to reach out to that light. Demara? Elder Garrel interrupted her thoughts, a look of concern on her wizened face. Demara hadn't meant to, but her hand was reaching towards the heart crystal. In recovery, she grabbed a small, deep blue crystal flecked with gold that rested just in front of the larger crystal, and spun. This one, Demara said, holding the crystal up to show those assembled. Rainey cheered, and Marco gave her a knowing look. Our young ones have chosen, Elder Garrel proclaimed. Now it's time to feast while they begin their first lesson. Go, Blossom Tribe, eat, be merry. In a matter of moments, only the elders and a few of the adults were left in the room with Demara, Rainey, Marco, and Colden. Demara swallowed and shifted the crystal to her other hand to wipe her sweaty palm on her shirt. This was the moment they had been waiting for, and would determine the rest of her life. Take a seat, children, Elder Garrel said. It is time for you to learn to awaken your crystals. Sit. Cup your hands in your laps, resting your crystal inside. Close your eyes and feel the crystal with your mind. You will feel an energy, a vibration from it. Follow that vibration, harmonize with it, and you will feel the crystal accept you. Demara did as told, and concentrated on the small, deep blue crystal resting in her cupped palms. In her mind she touched it, felt it, observed the way it reflected light, and she thought, perhaps she could feel the tiniest of vibrations coming from the crystal, like the faintest breeze against her skin. Beside her, Rainey gasped, dropping the stone in her lap before sheepishly picking it back up. On her other side, Colden simply let out a wow. It was another moment before Marco's eyes went wide as he stared at the small stone in his hand. What were they doing that she wasn't? Elder Garrel nodded. Now that you have all attuned your crystals, it is time for you to petition a mentor to oversee your training and guide you to how you may best contribute to the tribe. I know by now each one of you young ones has already decided which path you will choose. Still, it is customary to hear the words and consider your choice deeply. With a gesture from Elder Garrel, the adults in the room stepped forward, offering one final plea for their role. First, Elder Harris spoke for the builders, reminding them of the good work to be done building and maintaining shelters for the tribe. Next was Demon for the hunters, who spoke about bravery and persistence. Then Gentara spoke for the shepherds, who urged diligence and patience. Elder Garrel spoke for the crystal keepers, about memory and guidance. Then came Kolhar, the farmer, who simply said they would work in the dirt. There was one missing, she knew. In the years before, Uncle Derek or another explorer would have been there to talk about courage and new horizons. But there were no more explorers in the Blossom Tribe. When they finally turned to her and asked which job she meant to apprentice, she almost misspoke. Hunter. She hoped nobody would notice the slip, but several of the elders passed looks between them. Elder Garrel, however, did not seem to have heard anything wrong. Very good, very good. 2 hunters this year, but it's always so. Does this please you, Demon? Father was smiling, one of the biggest, proudest smiles she had ever seen on him. The hunters can take them both. One is, after all, my daughter. Elder Garrel sighed and rolled her eyes. Go now, go feast, and practice with your crystals, young ones. You 4 shall lead us in the lighting this evening. Demara was the last to stand, and followed the rest of them absently as she tried to feel her crystal like it seemed the others had. Instead, all she felt was a faint tickle, something she could not be certain she wasn't just imagining. She spent the whole of dinner trying to feel her crystal, while her father and mother and the whole tribe told her how proud of her they were, that she was going to make a great hunter. It was almost an accident, then, When near the end of dinner, she felt that tickling and focused on it. It was difficult to keep hold of in her attention, as faint as it was, but when she finally got a grip, she imagined it was her crystal and told it in her mind to glow. At first, she felt little change in her mind, but when she opened her eyes, she noticed the faint glow deep in the indigo crystal. The sun had long set, and Father smiled when he looked over to her, noticing the faint blue cast to her features coming from her crystal. "Very good, Demara," he said. "I knew you'd be a natural." The others turned to see, and they too began to smile. Elder Garrel nodded in agreement. "Indeed, it is time to begin the rite. Everyone, gather round and light your crystals as this young one has. Offer your light to Ulari, our god, that her offering will grant us the dreamer's favor in the coming turning." All around the small village square, lights of red and gold and green and blue and violet sparked to life in the hands of the adults of the Blossom tribe. Ulari, the heart crystal, had been brought out during the feast and now rested upon her dais to greet the turning, and they began to sing. It was a slow and ancient thing, more sounds than words to Demara's ears. If there had once been meanings to the sounds, they had been lost to anyone in the Blossom tribe. But the melodies and harmonies were beautiful and ancient and seemed to resonate in her crystal. She could feel as light she gathered drained away, pooling with the rest of the Blossom tribe in their heart crystal, Ulari growing brighter and brighter, singing along. Holding the crystal and drawing more power into it was one of the strangest sensations Demara had ever felt, but it felt secure. If there would be no moon, no stars to guide them this turning, then they could at least light their own way. Finally, Ulari flashed a brilliant, pure white light that rushed out, sweeping past the tribe to meet the turning that was sweeping across the world. Demara blinked away the tears from the light, and when she finally did, she was happy to see the ever-present blanket of clouds from the last year was retreating, revealing the stars among the familiar purple skies of the turning night. She cheered at the sight and was surprised when the rest of the Blossom tribe joined along.